I have been looking at criminal cases in America for a while now, and my most recent videos I tackled cases related to shootings in America. But crime doesn't only happen in America, crime happens all over the world. So I set my sights on Japan because they are known for having a very low crime rate, for the most part. Well, one of the curious things that I found was the amount of documented criminals from Japan, since some of them have crazy stories, like the otaku killer who single-handedly hurt the image of otakus in Japan, the mind control killer who was a very deranged individual. These people are insane in their own rights, but they aren't as bizarre as Shoko Asahara, who led a cult that was responsible for a lot of terrorist attacks in Japan. The Sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway, which was responsible for 14 deaths and it injured 1,050 people. Shoko started as a shady cult leader that later turned to violence when people didn't comply with his wishes. He was a man that tried to take over Japan, but was caught before things got out of hand. This video is a documentation of the cult's activities as well as explaining some of the worst actions. This video contains violence, murder, and a long list of horrible crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. So, Shinrikyo was started by Shoko Asahara. He was born on March 2nd of the year 1955. His original name was Shitsuo Matsumoto. From now on, I will be calling him Shoko. He was born in Yatsushiro from the Kumamoto Prefecture. He came from a poor family who specialized in making tatami mats. Shoko had infantile glaucoma from birth, and he went blind from his left eye and partially blind on his right eye. So right off the get-go, he had a tough life. So because of his condition, he went to a school for the blind. Shoko had a bad reputation from a young age because he was known for taking advantage of others. He would extort students. If students didn't comply, he would beat them up. Shoko would graduate in 1977. He started to study acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. After a year later, he got married in 1978 and had 6 children with his wife. Shoko was convicted of practicing medicine without a license as well as selling unregulated drugs, so he was fined 200,000 yen for his infractions. Shoko took interest into religion. Shoko had to take care of a family, but he started to dedicate some time to studying religion. Shinrikyo was created in 1984. It was initially called Shinsen no Kai. No real changes happened until 1987 when he decided the name Shinsen no Kai to Shinrikyo. He also legally changed his name from Shitsuo Matsumoto to Shoko Asahara. Shoko registered his cult. Government officials were hesitant to make his cult an official religion, but 1989, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government legally recognized Shinrikyo as a religious corporation. Shinrikyo combines a lot of beliefs and practices from Buddhism, Hinduism, and they also describe apocalyptic events that would end the world. Shinrikyo's doctrine and main beliefs was that Shoko Asahara was the chosen one. He wrote a book in 1992 called Declaring Myself the Christ. He was a savior to the people who followed his teachings, and he said that he was the Lamb of Christ that was put on this earth to save people from the end of times. He would also tie in Hinduism and Buddhism concepts like karma and other things. But in the end, the way of earning salvation was through following his teachings. Experts say that this was an offshoot of Japanese Buddhism, even though Shinrikyo rejected claims of Buddhist characteristics and affiliation. He said that the world was going to end and his purpose was to take sins of others, and he claimed he could transfer his spiritual power to his followers. Shoko described his doomsday prophecy detailing a third world war coming, and described that nuclear Armageddon was imminent and Japan would fall. So Shoko's role was to offer salvation to those who followed him. After this nuclear Armageddon was over, the whole world would be wiped out except to those who followed him. Shoko described the US as the beast from the Book of Revelations, and that the Third World War was going to be instigated by the US. So now you think that even though the religion is a little bizarre, it doesn't seem too bad, right? The problem wasn't the insane beliefs themselves, but their actions were the reason why this cult gained their infamy in Japan. Shoko would begin his religion that focused on yoga, meditation, and alternative medicine. Eventually, it became a domestic terrorist group. Shoko would work on recruiting members as time passed. Masamoto made a lot of claims about him being able to do supernatural things such as levitate and having the ability to use telekinesis. The cult obtained a considerable number of members like average salary workers, business people, college students, and even political officials that held considerable power in Japan. They did everything in order to gain new followers by promoting the religion on TV, through books like Declaring Myself the Christ, and even anime, which was an attempt to recruit anyone and everyone into his cult. So now you're probably wondering, what was the initiation process for this cult and why would people want to join this cult? Well, most people who joined the cult were people who had a feeling of emptiness and a lack of purpose in life, people who were down on their luck, or people who were in a very desperate situation. His methods are not of the norm when it comes to recruiting people to a religion. What made them stand out as bizarre was the initiation process in which people were going through hellish practices in order to join. People were forced to excommunicate from their loved ones and take part in some insane mental exercises. One of them was sitting in water for extended periods of time, and they were also forced to live underground for a while. Some of the weirder initiation methods were the consumption of his hair, body fluids, or eating his leftover food. The belief behind this was that Shoko was so pure that he would give you some divinity, even though some people think that this might be strange. Keep in mind that some people from other religions would be inclined to do this if their gods commanded them to obey their practices. So you're probably wondering if these practices were dangerous and even deadly. Well, the answer is simple. Yeah, they were dangerous. Some people even died. Those who died were either buried alive or even cremated in order to avoid suspicion from the general public, and this was only the beginning. The cult was taking a turn for the worse, and they became more and more violent over time in the hopes of bringing the apocalypse sooner. People became more and more suspicious of the cult's activities because people went missing, and eventually, a lot of the protesters were up in arms since a lot of the members had excommunicated their friends and loved ones. People worried about their loved ones to the point people started to protest, and some sadly never found out the fate of their loved ones. So now you're probably wondering, how did Aumshin Rikyo manage to gain funds for their activities? Since they had a lot of facilities, they made cassette tapes for their followers. They also made an anime with the help of an anime studio and many more expenses that went to some of their more nefarious actions. Well, they managed to obtain money from the worshippers by asking them to give money to the cult, because according to the teachings of Aumshin Rikyo, people were supposed to remove their need from material needs. People were willing to go broke for the sake of contributing to the cult, and there were some people who had a lot of money and power that greatly helped the expansion of the cult. Afterwards, they were told people would have to listen to tapes of Shoko Asahara repeating sentences, which, to be honest, is better than reading, but honestly I would be annoyed if I had to listen to them for extended periods of time.
Other techniques of mind control included hours of chanting and listening to tapes like this.
Asahara Shoko です。使用するぞ、使用するぞ、使用するぞ、使用するぞ、使用するぞ。功徳を積むぞ、功徳を積むぞ、功徳を積むぞ、功徳を積むぞ、功徳を積むぞ。瞑想するぞ、瞑想するぞ、瞑想するぞ。
A lot of students were recruited into the cult. For cults, it's not impossible to obtain members who are young, but the number of young students in the cult were staggering. Eventually, the cult would try to present a nice front to the general public by acting like the cult was bringing fulfillment, salvation, and purpose in the lives of those who felt empty. But behind the scenes, the cult would start showing their dark side more and more. With the rise of Aumshin Rikyo, skepticism also rose and people started to question Aumshin Rikyo. Was put to the test when news reporters tried to question a lot of his claims, like his ability to levitate, the legitimacy of his divinity, as well as trying to replicate his levitation trick, and outright challenge the teachings and philosophy of Aumshin Rikyo. The cult desperately tried to silence those who criticized their actions. Shoko's intention was clear. It was no longer about helping out the people, it was about obtaining control. He wanted to establish power at all costs. Various people were silenced by the cult, but it felt like this only brought on more suspicion to the cult. Tatsumi Sakamoto was a lawyer who was anti-cult. He tried to help cult members who were helpless or were being taken advantage of. Some cults can be very predatory, so he would try to disprove the charade in order to help people who fell victim to these kinds of organizations. He was a man with good intentions who questioned the cult's actions, and it started when he attempted to file a class action lawsuit in order to bring down Shoko. He tried to get people to testify against the cult's misdeeds, such as trying to get people to admit that they were taking part in the cult by force. So in 1988, he tried to pursue a class action lawsuit that was called Aumshin Rikyo Higashi no Kai, or Aumshin Rikyo Victims Association. Sakamoto actively put himself in danger when he challenged a power-hungry cult leader. He managed to obtain a blood sample of Shoko Asahara in order to see if he had any divinity in his blood. Sadly, the test just proved that Shoko was only a human. It wasn't anything special, and without evidence, the cult's reputation would tank if this information was brought to light. On top of that, there was a news broadcast that was going to be released with this incriminating evidence on Tokyo Broadcasting System television. So Shoko's fate was sealed, right? There was no way for him to stop Sakamoto from tarnishing or even embarrassing Shoko. But there seems to have been a rat among them, and this betrayal saved Shinrikyo from tanking, because they knew what Sakamoto was going to do. This rat intentionally broke its source of protection, which in the US is called source confidentiality. This was done without Sakamoto's knowledge and would lead to his downfall. Because after hearing about this interview, Shinrikyo pressured the news source into canceling the broadcast. They were going to make sure that Sakamoto would never be a problem. So on November 3rd, 1989, the team that was sent to deal with Sakamoto consisted of Chief Scientist Hidao Murai, a martial arts master Satoru Hashimoto, and Tomomasa Nakagawa were sent to kill him. So they brought syringes that contained potassium chloride. So the plan was to ambush Sakamoto on the way to work, but the plan failed because it was a holiday. After this plan failed, they just decided to go to his house. So at 3 a.m. on November 4th, 1989, they arrived at his house and got in because the door was unlocked. So the group entered the house and killed Tatsumi Sakamoto, his wife Satoko Sakamoto, and his 14-month-old baby Tatsuhiko Sakamoto. All three of them were injected with the potassium chloride. The wife and baby died almost instantly, and Tatsumi put up a fight since the poison didn't kill him fast enough, so the three men strangled him to death. The remains were put into separate metal drums, and the drums were hidden in 3 separate prefectures in the hopes of covering up the crime. Their teeth were smashed in so it would make it impossible to identify the bodies. Every piece of evidence was destroyed and the tools they were dropped in the ocean. The bodies were undiscovered until the perpetrators were captured. The crime was atrocious, but that was just the beginning of Shinrikyo's reign of terror. A lot of reporters and protesters were missing, and some were dissuaded out of fear for their lives. Hey guys, it's Brain here, and if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Aum's interest in chemical and biological weapons can be traced back to the early 1990s. Between 1990 and 1995, Aum launched 17 CBW attacks with motivations ranging from assassination to mass murder. Of these attacks, 10 were carried out with chemical weapons, 4 with Sarin, 4 with VX, 1 with phosgen, and another one with hydrogen cyanide. And 7 attempted attacks were carried out with biological agents, 4 with anthrax, 3 with botulinum toxins, aka Botox, although in both cases the microbacterial strains were non-virulent. Now let's explain these chemical and biological agents involved and their respective deadly effects. Hydrogen cyanide is a colorless or pale blue liquid or gas with a bitter, almond-like odor. Hydrogen cyanide interferes with the body's use of oxygen and may cause harm to the brain, heart, blood vessels, and lungs. Exposure can be fatal. Anthrax is a type of infectious disease caused by the spore-forming bacterium Bacillus anthracis. Anthrax can be inhaled, causing a disease in the respiratory tract and an infection in the bloodstream. In addition to these cases, Aum is alleged to have killed 20 of its distant members with VX and has been linked to 19 other cases of CBW attacks and attempted attacks. The assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother Kim Jong-nam is an example of how deadly and effective VX is as a chemical agent. In addition to that, Shoko Asahara and 40 other members traveled to Africa to take an Ebola virus sample in order to make a biological weapon, but the result ended up as a failure.
During this time, Shinrikyo had been stockpiling some very dangerous weapons. They had access to anthrax, the VX nerve agent, and sarin gas, which were all banned by the United Nations because they were deemed to be weapons of mass destruction. Shoko Asahara and his group started becoming more and more violent towards those people who opposed him, and to the dismay of the cult, the general public wasn't letting down because their cult was becoming more and more dangerous as time progressed. Shinrikyo started off as a cult that had some shady activities, but eventually it progressed to something far worse as there were some attempted assassinations and eventually it led to mass murder. Ultimately, Shinrikyo was forever tarnished as a domestic terrorist cult by the whole world.
This incident showed Japan Shinrikyo's true colors, as the cult was already under suspicion for several reasons, but this attack sparked massive outrage from the public. This attack happened on June 27th of the year 1994 in the town of Matsumoto. Shinrikyo members were posted up in the Kaiichi Heights area. The members used a converted refrigerator truck, which was used to release the sarin gas. This attack served two purposes. This attack was used as a revenge against the people of Matsumoto, since they had signed a petition against the cult because they tried to build a facility in the city, and the majority of the people were against this. So this was a revenge against the people of Matsumoto. The second reason behind the attack is a little more morbid. This attack was used as an experiment to test sarin gas in an open area. This attack was responsible for more than 500 injuries, 7 victims passed away, and one was left in a coma for 11 years, and she eventually died shortly after waking up. Animals in the affected area had dropped dead, and this attack sent the mass into a panic. The police started looking for any suspects, and eventually they got an anonymous tip that placed the blame on Shinrikyo. So the police had a target. This was a turning point for as they became enemy number one in the eyes of the public. Shoko Asahara flew too close to the sun, and now he was the main target by all of Japan. Shoko and his most trusted members were being persecuted by the authorities. Shoko was being chased by the police, but he didn't want to go down without a fight, and 9 months later, he would enact his second attack. This second attack happened at the Tokyo train station on March 20th of the year 1995. This attack was carried out during rush hour. Many people were heading home from work after a long day, and unbeknownst to them, it would be one of the darkest days in Japanese history. This attack was one of the worst attacks behind the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Several members of Shinrikyo all had a small bag of sarin gas that was wrapped in a newspaper and an umbrella. The members were instructed to put the bag of sarin gas on the floor, and they used the umbrella to puncture the bag on the way out of the train. During this time, people started showing symptoms in mere seconds, and everyone was sent into a panic. Eventually, the train was forced to shut down as the paramedics and other staff members were sent to deal with the sarin gas. In total, 14 people lost their lives during this incident. 2 of those, being subway employees, were sent to dispose of the sarin gas at Kasumigaseki Station. More than 1,000 people had been affected by the gas. Some had trouble breathing, muscle spasms, and severe skin irritation, whilst others were convulsing and bleeding from the mouths and nose. The attack was so devastating that they were trying to find the culprits. Shoko used this attack as a way to stop the police from investigating Shinrikyo, but this only put a bigger target on their back. Authorities quickly picked up on the similarities between the Tokyo train attack and the one in Matsumoto, and quickly concluded that the perpetrators were behind both incidents. As more and more evidence came out of it, it was Shinrikyo's involvement in both incidents was undisputable. So police conducted a raid on all of offices and eventually captured all of the top executives, as well as Shoko himself, who was hiding in a hidden bunker. After this, a lot of the top members admitted to their involvement in various incidents around Japan. They also leaked a lot of incriminating evidence against Shinrikyo, like the murder of the Sakamoto family. Everyone but Shoko himself gave an explanation or an apology for the involvement in the cult's activities. Shoko eventually went crazy, saying a lot of the random prophecies in broken English. A lot of the people thought he was trying to get an insanity plea. Meanwhile, others thought he finally lost his mind. Whatever the case was, Shoko's fate was sealed. He was to pay for all of his crimes with his life. Shoko was sentenced to hanging in 2018, and in an ironic twist, the man who claimed to be able to levitate died from hanging. After the attacks, Shinrikyo was disbanded and split up into 2 factions, one called Aleph, led by Fumihiro Joyu, and the other called Hikari Noa, formed in 2007. Hikari Noa's goal is not to influence a particular faith, but instead to help people find a new way to think about religion in their daily lives. A lot of the top members were executed, all but Hideo Murai, who was assassinated by a Yakuza member in broad daylight during an interview. He died on live TV during a broadcast in front of many people. The perpetrator peacefully turned himself in without fighting, and Hideo died on the way to the hospital. Shinrikyo was forever tarnished, and what remains of is being closely watched by the authorities. Many ex-members were shunned from society even if they didn't play a part in any crimes, because when people remembered Shinrikyo, they only remembered the attacks. After the execution of Shoko, the authorities didn't know what to do with the remains because if the cult got their hands on it, then the ashes would have become an item of worship. So the authorities entrusted the remains to Shoko's daughter, who had always condemned her father's actions, and she cut ties from the family after having a terrible childhood. She was tasked with disposing of Shoko's ashes without the cult's knowledge, and was placed in a witness protection program so that she wouldn't be prosecuted by anyone. Meanwhile, the other children defended Shoko's trial. They cited that his mental health was the cause of it all, and that he shouldn't have received the death penalty. Even after everything, Shoko was sentenced to death for his crimes, and his reign of terror was put to an end.
A scratch in here, you're shorty, yeah, getting down, yeah, yeah. Knock it out the park and send her home, yeah, yeah. Now I'm sitting here,